9 million people, according to the United Nations, die of air pollution every year.
At its core, Ulez is a climate policy designed to help people.
It's very clearly a policy to reduce air pollution. It's not to reduce carbon pollution, which is a climate policy.
But Ella still remains the only person in the world to have air pollution on the death certificate.
Welcome to the Media Storm studio. We are joined today by two very special guests. Our first guest is the founder, director and trustee of the Ella Roberta Foundation. She's one of the most prominent advocates for clean air worldwide. She started campaigning as soon as she realised the role of pollution in her daughter Ella's death. Her determination to highlight the human cost of air pollution has led to her addressing audiences all over the world, and now here on Media Storm, we are truly honoured to be joined by Rosamund Adoo-Kissi-Debrah.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for joining us.
Our second guest is an award-winning climate reporter at Bloomberg News. He is the host of the podcast Zero, exploring the policies, tactics and clean technologies taking us to a future of zero emissions. He's also the author of Climate Capitalism, the book which tracks the unlikely heroes driving the fight against climate change. We're sure to talk about that a bit more later on, but for now, welcome to the studio, Akshat Rathi.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here.
Now, there are many stories we could pick for this discussion, but we wanted to focus on one in particular purely because there is just so much to say, and that is Ulez. A local traffic policy. Oh, Lord, you said it all, Rosamund. It is supposedly a local traffic policy, but it's been spun into a scandal of sensational, or dare I say sensationalist proportions.
Ulez, an acronym for the Ultra Low Emission Zone, is an attempt to improve air quality in London by establishing an area free of the most polluting vehicles by charging drivers a daily fee to bring them in. It was introduced in central London in 2019 and then expanded last summer to include most of Greater London.
On the face of it, Ulez is a cross-party climate policy conceived by a Conservative London Mayor, Boris Johnson, and implemented by his Labour successor, Sadiq Khan. But in reality, Ulez has become a political cage-fight drama dominating British electoral politics.
And what a point there straight away. I'm not sure many people actually know that it was an initial Conservative policy. I used to work in a London newsroom, so we only covered London news. And therefore, we covered Ulez a lot. And it was shocking to see how quickly stories about Ulez became stories about actually anything else. It wasn't a reasonable discussion about pros and cons. Being anti-Ulez became kind of synonymous with being anti-woke, whatever the hell that means. I'm doing that in inverted commas for listeners. And it also became an excuse to bash the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. But just to start off, we'll get into all of that. Akshat, maybe you can explain to listeners why Ulez has been so controversial in our media.
So, because Ulez requires drivers to pay a fee to bring it in, any type of tax, so to speak, is not popular. Nobody wants to pay any extra money than they already were paying. So you start off with a place where already you have to pay something. But then it's the government's job to explain the benefits that will come from that process. Reduces traffic, reduces air pollution. Now, having had Ulez for a few years, we can actually look at data and look at the air pollution levels in London. They have fallen. And another thing to note is that that policy has now been copied by other cities. So there are benefits. But because it starts off from a place of punishing somebody doing something bad, that punishment is seen as a thing to hang your hat on and complain about it.
That's really harsh punishment. Wow.
Giving money to the government.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I'm going to go back further. I think we can actually link it to my daughter's death. I think, and as I go through this, I'll try and be as quick as I can, and you may recognise it. I don't know whether, I think originally it started with actually Ken Livingstone with the congestion charge. Actually, I think it goes that far back. Yeah. And when Mr. Johnson, good morning, Mr. Johnson, when Mr. Johnson got in, he obviously initially expanded it. Now, unfortunately for my late daughter, I think Mr. Johnson realised that it wasn't very popular. and he also wanted to be a popular prime minister, and he should have done more than he actually should. Now, during Ella's inquest in 2020, it became apparent to all the experts, like yourself there, that Ulez needed to go London-wide. And this is a very, very important point. Boris Johnson did a study of schools. I think 563 of them, or 68 of them, were in areas of high air pollution. Now, not high air pollution, illegal levels of air pollution.
Yeah.
Now, rather than tackle it, what he did apparently, and I say that so I don't get sued by him, is he opened a drawer and he put that research in there
Yeah.
and left it for the next mayor to deal with. In the meantime, we need to remember 250,000 children in London have asthma, and they continue to die. Now, something we will never know, and it's not controversial, that if Mr. Johnson had carried on doing what Sadiq Khan had done, whether my daughter would have lived. We will never know that. So this is a very serious matter. Now, you mentioned that low emission zones, I think there's 250 of them all over the world. Now, Ulez actually means reducing emissions. Now, how you go about that does vary from country to country. Now, whether Mr. Livingston, Mr. Johnson, or Mayor Khan, they decided for the UK it would be better to charge. And I can hear people going, well, if it's da-da-da-da-da, why didn't he ban it? Can you imagine in central London banning something? Because we even know when Mayor Khan did this, Mr. Sunak or the 5 councils took him to court. And I genuinely believe if he had banned things rather than charged, he may have lost in court. And that's what I genuinely believe. I don't think Mr. Khan sat there and went, let me charge people, let me bring in all this money, because it's actually ring fenced. It's actually this whole myth that he can use the money to bail out the debt of TfL. He's not allowed to. He can use it to maybe do the Superloop buses and things like that, but it is not there. The biggest myth that this money is there to reduce TfL's bill. Hell to the no, he's not allowed to do that. And the likes of me would be screaming blue murder, because one of the things I knew is Ulez extending to outer London was incredibly difficult, and I supported it and pushed him based on health reasons, the health data. Now, I know some brilliant scientist is going to me, but Ros, that's because the actual age of the people in outer London is older, which is true, but I still think the health outcomes for outer London were a lot higher. But by November 2022, even before Ulez had extended to outer London, 702,000 vehicles had already changed. It is a big myth. And that's why, by the way, the election result looked the way it did. Because people thought all these people in outer London were going to vote against Sadiq, and they couldn't understand why in some of the boroughs his vote had gone up. They had already changed his cast because they could see what was coming, and some of them who could afford, I do admit, thought this is eventually going to come here. People need to understand that air pollution, there are no borders. There's not air pollution in Lewisham, and then the moment you get to Bromley, it suddenly stops.
In terms of what Akshat said, yeah, you point out there so well that yeah, we think of fines as punitive, but we are looking at illegal levels of air pollution.
Yes.
And so actually it's very moderate. He could have, or maybe he couldn't have, but one might have introduced a ban, and instead we've introduced a fine. And I think that something that we also gather from this is pollution. The role that pollution has in this story is so underplayed. I mean, this has been reported in our news as a business story, an electoral story. It's been reported as a conspiracy story. I mean, just a couple of days ago, GB News published the headline.
What did they say?
Yeah,
Go on,
maybe
tell
sure
me.
I get this right. Published the headline, Ulez to be discussed by Sadiq Khan with the Pope in behind closed doors meeting. I mean, I don't know how many meetings the Pope has at his local coffee shop. They're probably all behind doors. But, it hasn't been a middle of this, a climate story, because the key context that GB News failed to mention in that headline is that the Vatican happens to be hosting a climate summit for mayors around the world. So, why is our media painting this as an economic and political firestorm, not a climate storm. And I think that ultimately what you do so well, Rosamund, is remind us why, at its core, Ulez is a climate policy designed to help people. And you touched on your daughter. Maybe you could explain to us a little bit more about why your daughter's death is so relevant to the
Yeah,
US story.
I actually didn't know there was a climate. You've just told me that in Rome, Mr. Khan. I am free. I can come along with you, and we can plug Ulez to all those mayors in those 40 cities. No, back to on a very, very serious note, and that one is serious, and I actually meant it, Sadiq. Ella, unfortunately, became incredibly ill. And by the way, 1.1 million children in the UK have asthma, and in London, I've mentioned it
Two
is.
right here, me and
Oh,
Helly,
I'm
both
sorry.
asthmatic.
It is 250,000 of young people have asthma, and every time there's a spike in air pollution, there are more people hospitalized through asthma attacks and heart attacks, and I don't know why they try and minimize it, because there's over 70,000 papers. Like, air pollution is linked to so many illnesses, like I mentioned, to like heart attacks, asthma attacks, obesity, low birth weight. I can't really understand why they try and minimize it at all. I don't know about that. It is a health issue. If they spent as much time, politicians, talking about air pollution as they do about vaping, I think we would move forward. I don't know why they do. Maybe because air pollution or green policies are deemed expensive, or you can answer that. Why am I?
Well,
Yeah.
air pollution, I mean, global statistics are far worse than London statistics, and I'm not trying to minimize
No,
the
no, no,
harm it's
no.
doing to Londoners. But 9 million people, according to the United Nations, die of air pollution every year. 9 million people die of air pollution every year.
Prematurely.
Prematurely. And about 4 million of them are because of air pollution, outdoor air pollution, that's mostly down
That's
to
true.
fossil fuels. 5 million people die of indoor air pollution. This is when in developing countries you're using wood to burn and cook, and that causes a lot of air pollution because it's poorly burnt, etc. And so air pollution is a huge stain on public health globally, and a much bigger one outside of rich countries.
Wow. I had no idea that that figure was so huge, because here in the UK, I mean, as far as I'm aware, Rosamund, your daughter Ella's death was the first case we had of a coroner ruling that her death was caused by pollution, illegal levels of pollution.
Yeah, I think it's a scandal, really. I mean, 36,000 people die prematurely here. Now, people can argue with me. Okay, I am quite willing to adjust that figure to maybe 28,000. But Ella still remains, since 2020, that's almost 4 years ago now, the only person in the world to have air pollution
In
on
the
the
world.
on a death certificate. Now, these bright people around this table, I always, all the bright people listening as well, I think people need to try and start thinking. So you mentioned a figure of 9 million. For me, the interesting question, why is Ella the only person in the world? And really, the only reason why she is because we fought and asked for another inquest. So if I hadn't, nobody would still have air pollution on a death certificate. Now, rather than people going, they need to think, why do they think it is? Scientists know that people die from air pollution. So why isn't it listed on the death certificate? Methinks some governments don't want to be held accountable. Is that quite controversial to say that?
No.
What?
I
No, as journalists, every time I go to the government, I'm like, so I think you've done this thing wrong. Can you give me a statement? They're like, yeah, oh my God, we hold our hands up. We did it all wrong. Thank you for exposing us. No, they're like, you are delusional. You are crazy. Your sources are crazy. We're going to sue you if you publish this.
I thought, do you know what? I naively thought that once Ella's death had been exposed, I was thinking of more people being able to succeed. I've looked at what's going around the world. People have tried to. In France and other places, there's been a massive pushback from governments.
Yeah.
I don't think government wants this. Why do you think it has something to do with fossil fuel industry, my dear colleague?
Oh, yeah, no, we'll get on to
Yeah,
that.
air
Don't
pollution
worry.
deaths are complicated in that usually the cause of death is because of things that happen in the body that might be specific as known causes in the coroner's list, and air pollution isn't on that list, and so they don't use it. So it makes things worse, as you said, prematurely kills people, and so that complication is used as a way of not trying to give it the right level of attachment, I think.
Yeah. And what was so sorely lacking in the media storm surrounding Ulez was any sense of proportionality. For all the political coverage and the political outcry, we didn't really hear the facts of how many people Ulez actually affected. Rosamund, you mentioned the TfL myth. That was one of the biggest misunderstandings of Ulez. Do either of you have any other big misunderstandings of Ulez?
I do. The fact that 97%, of vehicles in London are ULEZ compliant. That does leave 3%. And also, I do admit that the timing of it was not great from a cost of living point of view. When we went to court in 2020, there was no war in Ukraine. So when they said roll it out, it looked great. But yeah, I'm not going to deny I was behind, persuading the mayor to do it. The fact that 8 to 12 children in London alone still die from asthma every year. We have one of the worst death rates in Europe. I am always going to push for it. So I don't make any apologies about that. I do apologise for those who've been hard hitted. I do hope if there's any funding left in the ULEZ port, the actual remit could be expanded now. So more people. The idea I would like, and not for any ego or anything, for health reasons, is that we have 100% compliant vehicles. Now, air pollution isn't going to disappear because of that, because we have wood burning, construction, and I know my fellow colleague here is going to list all the other reasons we get air pollution, but it will be a huge help. Now, if 97% of vehicles are already compliant, I never understood Susan Hall when she said, I will stop it on day one.
Yeah.
I think people would have been fuming because a lot of people, they want clean air and they have changed their vehicles. And I don't think that would have gone down. That's why people were puzzled when they saw the results. I mean, there was a little rumour put out that Sadiq Khan was losing or something. That was one of the myths. And my own children, like, Mom, I was at a funeral. They said Sadiq's losing. You know how you get something? And I was like, no, there is some problem. They went, no, it's on social media. I was like,
Wait,
don't
yeah,
take any notice
another-
of
I
that.
know. So to get that right, the 97% of cars compliant. So this whole media storm was really upsetting for 3% of drivers, but
they
actually
count.
it
Let's
affects
be-
100% of children.
Let's be
in London.
compassionate. They do count, and maybe some of the poorest were in the 3%. Let's not, minimize it. And so
But
you
there's
see what's happening.
another myth that has been connected to ULEZ. It's very clearly a policy to reduce air pollution, which is a problem. It's not to reduce carbon pollution, which is a climate policy. So it's been taken on as a thing that, is a woke policy and attached to net zero plans that the UK government as a whole has. And then because of the election that happened in Uxbridge, which we can come to,
God, yes.
that has been used by the Conservatives as a way of trying to backtrack on national green policies. And look what's happened with the local election. Has backfired. That strategy has backfired.
Yeah, and unfortunately, some people wobbled. I think you have to really believe in it, as you say. So for the likes of me, who's read so much research, air pollution is about health. It's not about politics. And the way it has been manipulated, goodness me, it is very clever. I'm going to post this video of Mr. Sunak on my Twitter feed, and he's talking about reducing smoking. He might as well be talking about air pollution, but smoking is a winnable thing with parents and vaping, and he doesn't make air pollution seem so. I will always go back to, I'm showing my age, when I was young, 1 in 9 people got cancer. It's now down to 1 in 2, and I don't think that's a coincidence, because air pollution, and what people need to say is, oh yeah, in the 50s I could wipe it off my shoes, which is true. But now the air pollution is different. It is invisible, and I call it a silent killer. And I think young people, hopefully a lot of them will be tuning into this, you need to care about this. If the water is dirty, what makes you think air is clean? And it's linked to so many illnesses, especially respiratory, and you need to be worried about that. Your politicians are lying to you.
And Rosamund, what you said earlier about your daughter's confusion about Sadiq, not losing the election is such a good point. We want to give a sense here to listeners of just how tokenized Ulez became in the run-up to the local elections earlier this month.
Yep.
These elections saw Sadiq Khan win an unprecedented third term as London mayor, a win that surprised many after months of media coverage that implied Ulez was hammering his approval ratings. And now when this backlash never materialised at the polls, the BBC reported his record third mayoral victory came after the threat of a Tory surge in the suburbs simply evaporated. No explanation. Like the threat that they'd said existed, it just evaporated. And we were left wondering, was it ever there? Or was this just another media storm, a crisis in the headlines and not in reality?
We had a flick through the London Mayor's Voters Handbook. So everybody got one of these through their letterbox with all the campaign ads for every candidate. Left, right, up, down, all dividing lines disappeared and were replaced by one line only: pro-Ulez or anti-Ulez.
Oh, really?
And so we're just going to give you a little taste of our most unhinged highlights. So the first thing to say is that over half of the candidates, 6 out of 11, had abolished Ulez as one of their top priorities. Yet only one of the anti-Ulez brigade actually mentioned air pollution. In fact, air pollution only came up twice in the entire booklet, one of them being on Sadiq Khan's page. For an election essentially fought on Ulez, this tells us everything we need to know.
And actually, you mentioned Susan Hall. God, Helena was
Don't
hysterical.
plug her. Do not plug her. You have been warned by
Here
me.
comes the anti-plug.
Plug Susan
No,
Hall.
because we had to put up with... Unfortunately, I did follow her during the campaign because they say keep your enemies close. And every single day there was a tweet about Sadiq. I couldn't wait till that Saturday to press unfollow. So there you are. The floor's... It's your podcast.
Yeah, well, Susan Hall, as we said, who was the Conservative candidate this year, on her page, she felt so strongly about Ulez, she literally had the exact same sentence, twice on one page.
Go on,
There's
tell
not
me.
a lot of room for many sentences.
There's not, it's a small A5 booklet.
What'd she say?
Twice she wrote she'd scrap Ulez on day one because Londoners are struggling to make ends meet because of new driving charges. I mean, she literally wrote the same
Did she?
sentence twice.
Yeah.
Another of my favourite quotes from
Go
a
on.
candidate, Amy Gallagher, whose key
Who's
message,
that?
her key message was stand up to woke, whatever that means.
What does that? Oh, no, please, you guys are young. We've established
No.
your age. Please explain. No,
What
I
is
need
woke?
to.
If you ask us what is woke?
No, because I know what it means,
Oh.
and I tell my children stay woke.
Yeah.
So please, you've got to.
Historically, it's derived from the civil rights movement
Thank you.
in America. But
Yep.
of course, it has become a word that
No,
is
no,
It
a
means
weapon.
that you're awake to injustice.
Thank you very much. I'm glad. As a teacher, I'm having my teacher hat on, and I need. She's under 30, y'all. She's young. I needed her to explain what woke is because my children, if you're listening to this, stay woke.
Okay.
And I'm only 30.
It sounds like
Ouch!
Amy Gallagher needs to listen to this lesson
Yeah.
on what woke is.
So, she wrote, this really made me laugh because she wrote, I will end Ulez. I will depoliticise London's transport system. She says, as she gets involved in one of the most highly politicised concepts of the entire 21st century.
Oh yeah, I forgot today to bring my rainbow lanyard. Sorry,
Oh,
sorry,
yes.
Esther McVeigh.
Yes.
I think some people would know what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
Let's
I
keep it
know.
moving though.
But look, I think that to wrap up this section on Ulez, I feel that essentially with Ulez, we were just constantly, and we still are constantly missing the context. It reminded me of similarly to when Just Stop Oil protesters were blocking motorways. The press, the right-wing press in particular, would always go out of its way to find the one person that was on their way to the hospital and couldn't get there because Just Stop Oil had blocked the motorways. And then what they would do is that they would fail to include in that article what Just Stop Oil's key mission or message was.
Right.
And similarly to this, it's like we crucially miss out the context. The press play up the extreme cases of anti-Ulez and they miss the crucial context that we spoke about, such as the amount of cars that are already compliant, such as that it has nothing to do with TfL.
Yeah, can I just end by saying I absolutely I hope that would be part of Ella's legacy actually on a very serious note. Like I said before, if Ulez was extended to the South Circular and beyond, because outer London, believe it or not, included the South Circular, we would never know if some of those lorries had come off the road whether she would be here. But for those children who are in hospitals now, who will listen to this podcast, who struggle daily with their breathing, I hope ULACE is the start of the air improving. Look, there's so much more to do, and I'm not minimizing it. We are a city of 10.1 million, but majority of us don't drive. And as long as transport becomes safer, reliable, cleaner, I hope in future more of us will take public transport. But this is a very serious issue. It is a matter of life and death. And the fact that 250,000 children, I say it again, that's about 3 or 4 children in every class has asthma. This is serious. Every 2 seconds, someone has an asthma attack, and that could end your life. And for those who have already lost their life this year, to those parents, you have my commiserations, because asthma death is very suddenly. But I will continue to work to continue to hold the mayor accountable, and I would never get the mayor to bring in a policy that I thought was going to lose him the election. That doesn't even make sense. But we will continue to work on air pollution. And some of these solutions for air pollution are different. Some of them are similar to climate change, but some are also different. And thank you, I hope this bit makes it, to all those who could afford it and did change their cars, and who believe in clean air, and who want a better life for their children. Thank you very much for going out doing so.
Yeah, that'll definitely make it. The next thing we're going to talk about, Akshat, is partly based on something so interesting you said to Helena about how journalists haven't been trained in science and how both sidesism comes in. As we've just heard, as a news story, Ulez has been over-politicised and under-contextualised within the wider health and climate discussions. And this is typical for many similar discussions, ranging from net zero policies to climate protests to COP, and in international media too. A very striking thing is that when we assess the nature of climate reporting, the divisions fall very neatly across the right-wing, left-wing political divide.
We have an example of this from the news last week. A new study on plastic pollution showed us that 5 companies create a quarter of all plastic pollution. So it linked half of branded plastic pollution to only 56 firms, with about 24% connected to only 5 companies. These are companies such as Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, Nestle. It appeared that right-wing papers had a complete blind spot when regarding this new research. It was covered in 15 major outlets, 67% centre-left or left-wing, such as The Guardian, The Washington Post, 33% centre, such as Science magazines, and you guessed it, 0% right-wing outlets.
Akshat, is there any logic to this political divide in climate reporting?
So I would say, looking at sort of surveys of which companies are responsible, etc., you could find methodological flaws in how that was measured, etc. So let's not pick there. Let's start with what is agreed upon by tens of thousands of scientists in the world, right? We know that climate change is occurring. We've known that for 30 years. We've had an intergovernmental panel on climate change that has been putting out reports after reports, which are 30,000 pages long, that take all the research in the world and give you the latest understanding of where things are. And yet, we continue to think of it as a political story that whether climate change is happening or not, for the first 20 years of knowing that it is happening, was treated as a political story. And that's partly down to how journalism was done. And so just a history lesson, because I feel like, over here, we know our media is partisan, right? There would be some papers that are right-wing. There are some papers that are left-wing. That's how things operate. In the US, that's not how it's supposed to be. They are trying to be more objective, quote unquote, and they are trying to be less partisan. But in that process, because a science story is treated as a political story, because you need to hear not just from the scientists, but people who oppose the scientists, not just from a left-wing person, but also from a right-wing person, that false equivalence that comes in a politics story versus a science story is what's causing the problem. Because 99.7% of scientists will tell you climate change is happening because we are putting greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. The 0.3% who are probably not, credible enough are then treated as a single voice against the weight of evidence. That has been the problem for the first 20 years. What's happening now is that because climate impacts are here and there's just no way to deny them, they're moving on to a different kind of story, which is they're trying to poke holes in the solutions that you'll need to tackle climate change. So electric cars could be one where we tie it back to Ulez, but all kinds of other things. Heat pumps, oh, it's too cold, it's never going to work. Oh, they're loud and they're very noisy. It's not going to be good for you. Oh, they're so expensive and you will never be able to earn your money back even if your bills are lower. There are all these types of tactics that are going from what used to be climate denialism to climate delays.
Oh, see, I'm more cynical than you. I really am. I'm all about follow the money. I believe that when you mention these firms, that I'm not going to plug them, I believe that certain people have shares in them and they have self-interest. So what I mean by that is when I went with Ella's Law to the Houses of Laws, which was really interesting, they all in quotes agreed in theory that, oh, this is a really good law to come in. And no, I'm not going to mention, there was one person in particular who literally wouldn't support it. So all you do is you go to the register and you see where their self-interest lay, and you see they are on a board of Shell or things like that. So I'm even more cynical than you are. I believe that they are profiteering from it, and therefore it is in their interest to show this divide. Fossil fuels, alone. More than. How much money does that make every year? And it is not in their interest. Look at COP22 that happened. Where did they host it? And I thought the whole thing, oh, I better be careful. Remember, I said I need to censor myself.
No, but you do raise a really good point, actually.
Yeah, seriously. I better censor myself. But I was interested where it's being hosted and when it comes to oil. And when the person hosting it, which everyone knows because it made the media, said the science isn't real. So why host it over there? I never really understood it, but I think I've said more than I need to.
No, but listen, we can't talk about climate coverage in the news without talking about lobbying.
Okay.
As we record this, an article this week in The Guardian revealed fossil fuel companies are reportedly forcing governments to compensate them for lost earnings in the transition to a low-carbon global economy and subsequently destroying the world's ability to counter their harmful activities.
No, listeners, you did not misunderstand that. Fossil fuel companies are literally telling governments they have to financially reward them with billions in compensation when countries reduce their reliance on oil, gas and coal, because basically their lucrative gamble on a famously finite resource is coming to an end. And the sheer power required for this legal audacity gives you a sense of what climate reporters are up against. Teams of lawyers from the rich and powerful attempt to stop the press publishing stories they don't want you to see. Lobby groups with opaque funding try to undermine facts about long-established science. Akshat, from a journalist perspective, how much of a problem are lobby groups in undermining facts and coverage about the climate emergency?
The history of, again, climate reporting shows that lobby groups have tremendous power. So, again, going back to the 90s, there was a global climate coalition that was created by a group of oil companies, gas companies, utilities, coal companies, and they sowed doubt about science. They published these advertorials, they're called, in the New York Times, which sat alongside news reports, and they looked like news reports even though they were labeled, but it's very hard to tell when it's all text. And they tried to essentially poke holes in the science, which didn't exist or were very small, and they tried to embiggen them, and that really stopped policies from taking place. The United States of America, which historically as a cumulative emitter is the largest greenhouse gas emitter in the world, still remains. China's catching up but may never catch up if we all reach our climate goals. has always been a laggard on climate policy because the lobby groups have won, because they've stopped the US government from adopting climate policies. Fortunately, at least in Europe, across the UK, but also in European countries, that hasn't happened. And some of that is because of our partisan media. Our partisan media allows us to actually have people have different views in different papers and not let the truth not come out, right? You can not have every story have this other side, which is 0.3% of the consensus, have a 50% voice in the story. So sometimes partisan media can be helpful, but in Europe in general, there is a consensus across most political parties, even as there's some backlash here and there.
Yeah, I mean, it just reminded me in court at Ella's inquest, and from a mother of losing my daughter in a terribly horrible way. I mean, Ella's fight and her ending, her Casey, who was QC at the time, equals it to torture, really. But what came out in court, seriously, you sit there and you all have these eminent scientists and you realize that air pollution is something they've known about for ages. The only people who didn't know is us, the public. Seriously, you sit there and you just look at them and they all come. Although they're very clever, they say, I wasn't in post at the time. I wasn't in post at the time. But they all knew. There was no one who sat there and went, I didn't know that air pollution was damaging. No, there was no one in court who sat there. And I think as much as before we went to court, I actually knew the answer anyway, because Stephen Holgate had, shown it. And when I said to him, what are the chances of it was air pollution and nothing else? And he went 97 something percent. And I knew the game was up even before we went to court. So I knew that. So the only thing I told my children is, if we go to court and don't win, it's because there are other forces at play. It's not because air pollution wasn't responsible for your sister's death. But sitting in court, it's just one after the other. No one came up and went, I didn't know about this. I didn't. So you are right. Generally, scientists, they have all known and for a very, very long time. And so the question really, I don't know whether you've answered it, is why haven't we, the public, or when people now say to me, how comes you didn't know about air pollution? Why didn't you move? And then I go, okay, Ella became ill in 2010. How much did you know then about air pollution? I mean, The Guardian have been great. Like every week almost there's a story. But I didn't know then because it wasn't in the public domain. That is 14 years ago, and we take for granted those stories that are coming now. But I'm really sad to some of the stories you've sent for today. I didn't even know about it, so it's still not really getting out there.
And you're right. The Guardian, for example, is really, really good on coverage, and coverage is totally lacking from other outlets. But it's not just that coverage is lacking. There is coverage that is like firmly anti, and honestly some of it makes me wonder, is this an intelligent strategy by media outlets in terms of staying relevant down the generations? I scrolled through the my weekly newsletter from the Telegraph, and I read 3 titles, and it made me think wow, you're not even shy about the fact you literally hate young people. It was one, nobody is buying into the net zero madness. 2, Jeremy Clarkson has exposed the lie at the heart of veganism. And then 3...
Who is he? Who is he?
Yeah, well, Gen Zs really don't give a fuck. And then 3, in case you had any doubt, was just hiring Gen Z is a nightmare. They literally don't show up for the first day of work. Is this a good strategy for longevity?
I would push back on the fact that doesn't exist in other media outlets. I come from Bloomberg News. I know other financial publications, Financial Times. They do cover climate change and cover it really well. If anything, in the past 10 years, climate coverage has been only getting better, bar some places. Those exist, and they probably will exist for a long time because, it's a story that if you wanted to really poke holes, you can find holes that are non-existent and just create them because it's possible to create fiction. But the people who deal in facts and people who want to make money have to deal in facts. So one of the reasons why I've always worked in business publications is that actually businesses care about facts, because if you don't have facts on your side, you can't make money, right? So follow the money is actually a good strategy. So, the point you were making, which is fossil fuel companies are pushing against regulations because they are going to lose money. Absolutely true. They will. That's their job because they want to make money selling fossil fuels. The good thing that's happening now is that you can actually make money selling solutions for climate change. And that's partly what my book is about. But it's also what I've seen, not just here in the UK, but world over, that there are all these solutions that are coming through where companies can make money. So you are starting to see a fight that is happening more on sort of what is the best solution for solving the needs that we have, which is how do we heat our homes, how do we move ourselves, rather than is it going to be about carbon, is it going to be about fossil fuels? It's about what's the best solution, and that turns out in most cases to be a clean energy solution.
Yeah.
Can I just say something about young people? I'm sorry, it's just triggered me. I am going to have my head of year, head of sixth form act. Look, 18 to 25-year-olds, you just mentioned they don't care about you lot, they think you lot are silly or whatever. Look, when I used to teach sixth form, one of my thing, the moment you turn 18 and came through my door, the thing I drummed into you, and I still feel the same. I don't care who you vote for. Get off your backside. There is an election, and you're going to hear me again and again. Get off. It's not like, oh, my vote doesn't count. Get off your backside, get your ID sorted, and within the next, hopefully I've calculated, well, where are we? We are May. So maybe in the next 6 months, well, the most I can promise you that by January there will be an election. And I've noticed already you're being sidelined. It's not who the politicians are talking to, because their attitude is you don't vote and you don't care. And do you know what? They are using that. Why don't you show them differently? I'm not going to tell you who to vote for. That's patronising and insulting. But I want to see that 18 to 25. I want you to surprise them. I've worked with young people since 1997, and I know how great you guys can be. Do not allow these people to dictate to you what's what. This is your this is your future. Look, you can read, the information's out there. Make a decision, even if you just put X anywhere. But I do want young people to go and vote, because they've already started to sideline you in this election. I've seen who they are talking to, and the policies they're talking about don't impact you, but don't let that stop you from voting. And Carol Vorderman's talking about tactical voting, and I know people are going to go, I can't believe she said that word, but I think some of you are going to have to join in. I think they have looked at you right now for 18 to 25 here. They're not going to vote. Let's just disregard them. Let's go for the people over the age of, in quotes, 65 who mainly vote. But I really want young people to have a say in who the next government are going to be. But I'm going to have to work hard, because I'm not going to say who to vote for, because that's not my role. But I really, 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 really want young people. And when it comes to climate, because you guys are going to live on the planet longer, it is in your interest to look at the parties and who is saying what you... I'm not saying you have to even vote for a mainstream party. If you don't want to, then don't. But please, 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 people fought and died for that right. And I'm speaking specifically to the 18 to 25-year-olds.
Hear him.
Oh, thank you for that.
100%.
I've got my head of sixth form hat on again.
It's making me feel like I'm at school again. I'm scared.
Sorry, everyone, but I need them to vote.
Okay, well, at Media Storm, we obviously call out what is wrong with the way our media reports on a certain topic, but we do also want to promote solutions-focused journalism. Okay. So on that topic, we often see climate news being catastrophized in our media, and maybe that's because it is a catastrophe. Yet, despite the fact that we are actually living through climate disaster, most people aren't exactly cowering in fear every day about the future of our planet. And many are simply doing something about it.
Akshat, tell us, does our media do enough to demonstrate the solutions that are underway? And perhaps you can touch a bit more on those covered in your book, Climate Capitalism.
I think if we take a philosophical approach towards journalism, one of the service that journalism provides to society is point to the problems that exist with government, that exist with businesses, that exist with other people, that these are problems that need to be fixed. Journalism is supposed to shine a light on them, and then the people responsible for them should fix them. That's a service that journalism provides. But journalism also provides a service in the form of education for adults into their life after they've left school, right? That's also a service that journalism provides. And I think in that vein, we tend to forget that that means you should also reflect on what are things that are working and highlight the stories on why those things are working, what goes into making a solution work. And that doesn't happen as often, probably because the philosophy is our job is to point to the problems. It's not our job to fix the world. It's not our job to try and do PR for solutions, right? They often, a good story is treated as public relations, which is not a thing that any journalist wants to be attached with. And so I think it's a false way of looking at it, because even within highlighting solutions, you have to show what are the steps, what are the hurdles that somebody had to overcome to be able to get to those solutions. So in my book, it's basically a series of success stories around the world that take either a technology solution or a systemic solution that has helped get us to a framework for solving climate change. So things that we know, solar, wind, batteries, electric cars, those are technologies, but also systemic levers such as how do you come up with a national climate law, which the UK did and has now been copied by multiple countries? How do you get shareholders in large companies to actually get those companies to change, because they need to change in a world which is getting hotter and does not want as many fossil fuels in the future? So what do you do to change the business model? The shareholders have to push it. So I go through examples in multiple places all around the world that do both deploy these solutions, but also find the levers that are in the system that need to be moved to make those solutions happen.
And I must add, you have to have hope. For someone who works with young people, I mean, it's no secret I have twins. And we still lived in the same house. And people go, why don't they move? Not all of us have lots and lots of money to move. And if you ask anyone who's a campaigner, when you start off, oh my goodness me, you know, being black female, to get funding, move. I do laugh when I see these things at me. Why didn't they move? I mean, like we can just click our fingers. But I'm back to saying about hope. I had to give them hope, didn't I, my twins? Because, and I'm definitely not about the catastrophe. No, because what that would have told them is they would die the same way their sister would die. I had to believe things would get better. So nitrogen dioxide has gone down. I do emit PM 2.5, which is very lethal. It's still quite high. But then I have to live in hope that wood burning, which contributes a lot to air pollution, and I'm talking in cities before people start slating me, you know, cities where we have central heating, we don't need it. And, you know, councils really need to really start banning wood burning. But I have to have hope. How can I, you know, for someone who advocates for young people, I have to believe that there is a future. I have to believe that the air you breathe will get better. I have to believe that I will continue to work with people in health so that they will reduce the number of casualties. I, for one, do not instill fear in my children. Otherwise, I actually wouldn't be sitting here now. I do think it's quite wrong, and some people will disagree with me, but I'm not all about the world is going to end. How can I say that to my children? I want them to look forward to a bright future. I want them to enjoy their childhood. Yes, there are things. I still think ultimately, when it comes down to it, people will do what they have to do. I may not be here, but I just can't believe some of the things that are going to happen. I do believe that.
I
Come
think
on, give me some. Yeah.
we should also just look at numbers, right? You make a passionate case. Obviously, through your work, you've been able to move policies to make effect change happen. So there's already hope in the fact that you have agency and you've had action because of your work. But also just at big, broad numbers, you know, sometimes it feels like on a day-to-day basis, and it's true, when you look at the headlines, it feels like, you know, things are getting worse. But the Paris Agreement was signed in 2015.
Oh, God.
Before it was signed,
Yeah.
the world was on track to be warmed by more than 4 degrees Celsius.
Oh, okay.
Now it's on track to be warmed by less than 3 degrees Celsius. That 1 degree Celsius is a very big shaved off catastrophes in the future. Not to say 3 degrees Celsius or less is good, not at all. We need to get to 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is what the Paris Agreement says. But the fact that we've been able to make progress, we shouldn't lose sight of that progress. And that's been made in less than 10 years. So, you know, we have another 25 years to get to net zero. There is
We
no
need to
reason
move a
believe
lot
we can't.
faster, though, don't we?
Yes.
Because lives are at stake, especially in the global south. I think every time London is flooded, we kind of think, or remember the heat waves a couple of years ago. But the fact that people are living with that day in, day out. And I think maybe we need to highlight those. We need to care more about other people in other, we may not suffer it ourselves. And I think young people are compassionate. Guess what it shows? Remember before COVID, all those marches with those young people, that showed me they care. And I still have hope. I mean, COVID put a kind of stop to all that, Fridays for Future, it was. I think ultimately something, I have to believe that when it comes down to it, young people will care. Well, because young people these days, they can't go onto the property ladder, they can't do this, they can't do that. So I believe climate is one thing they can associate with and make change. But I think the policymakers, the leaders, the politicians, I think they can dictate everything. And that, I'm back to that thing about voting. Show them that you don't dictate things.
Yeah.
And the London election should show people that they said, Siddiq's going to lose, this is going to happen. And ultimately, it didn't happen.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you were highlighting on the media story is that we are pointing to the problems, not as much to the solutions. That there's another bias that is there in media, because news is about what's new and what's new now. There is a lot of effort put into just focusing on the now, but we often forget the long term. And that is also not very well covered. We try and put context and stories where we try and show what happened over the previous decade, previous century, but we don't do that often because people also care about now, right? One of the reasons why you don't hear as many solution stories or as many long historical arches is because people don't want to read about it. So there's a burden on people too, right? As a journalist, I know that journalists care that their stories are read by many, many people. And so they take feedback from what people are reading and try and provide what service people are demanding, which is almost all the time, they're reading the stories of catastrophe. Catastrophe stories do sell. Those are the stories people want to read. People want to read about the problems. Not as many people want to read about the solutions. So if you are listening and you feel we're not covering solutions enough, then demand it. Subscribe to a paper that you believe is doing the right thing on the topic that you are interested in, and ask them, email them, tell them that you want solutions. And I think that will change how journalism is done.
I think also people feel like they don't know what to do about this topic because it's so huge. That's one of the things people always say. But I do think that we have let off governments and stuff. A lot of things I've noticed is put on individuals. You need to walk more. You need to do this. And that is good, but it is only going to contribute to a fraction of it. Really and truly, we have let governments, I mean, you can please comment on that. I feel like we have let them off the hook. And I'm talking about air pollution.
But I think you've already made the connection between an individual and changing the system, which is vote. People can choose to change the
Please
system
vote.
through voting.
Yeah, and I think I'll say two things to kind of wrap this amazing conversation up. And the first thing is that if you do want to hear more about how climate change affects those in the global south and around the world, Media Storm did an episode in our second series called Climate Frontlines, The Truth About Big Oil. So do scroll back and have a listen to that. And the second thing to say is that, focusing on solutions is important, because if we don't talk about the solutions, we do a disservice to the people who are at the forefront of these solutions, who are working every day in this fight, people like you.
Oh, thank you. That's so kind of you.
Yeah.
I think that's what we'll say to wrap
It's
up
been
this conversation.
amazing. It's been amazing. To come and I'm a big fan of young people. So to have me on here, it's just been an absolute thrill, and it's been a joy to be part of this conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
Will you both tell listeners actually where they can follow you and if they have anything to plug? Akshat, go ahead.
Yeah. So today I will have a podcast conversation on Zero, the podcast I host for Bloomberg Green, with Chris Skidmore, who used to be a Conservative MP, a minister in the Conservative Party, who was asked by the 2-month Prime Minister Liz Truss to do a review of net zero policies.
Oh, you said that word.
And he came out and he said, net zero is good for the economy and we must double down. And because the Conservative Party was backtracking, he quit government. And he's on the podcast talking about why he chose that path and why the case for net zero is stronger, whether you look at it from the left perspective or the right perspective. And you can follow me on X or LinkedIn. Those are probably the only two social media that I use these days.
Okay, thank you. And Rosamund, tell people where they can follow you and if you have anything you want to say or plug.
Yeah, you can follow me on X as well, the Ella Roberta Foundation, FDN, and on Instagram. I'm trying to up my Instagram. The more young people I get, I know. I'm trying to get there. What do I have coming up? I am hoping Helena's Law, but I'm going to be, as I said, I want to do a short film about the coming election, encouraging young people to vote, and I'm going to continue to advocate in this space about air pollution because we've got Ulez. We've got a new initiative coming out. I've persuaded Mayor Khan again to put air filtration into 200 schools in London, but there are 1,843 schools. So you see the gap, 200. So there's a lot of work in this space to still do.
Could I also request you to then think about having air filtration in the tube system? The air pollution levels.
You talk to Mayor Khan. Go on, talk to him.
Huge.
Right, get your notebook out, Khan.
You talk and buses as well. Someone said to me, "We want air conditioning in buses, Rose," and I go, "Mention it loud on the podcast." Mayor Khan, tune in, listen. This is all the
Have
requests.
you ever thought about running for mayor?
Oh, he's got
started
it.
here.
He's got it for 4 years. Right. To my children, that was just a question. We need to have a long conversation about this at home. Your mother currently is not considering running for mayor because I give a lot of my time, and my children feel like they share me with everyone. No, since I started teaching, actually, that hasn't stopped.
Yeah.
You know, I'm having. Is it next week or the week after? Half term, I have got off. I'm doing absolutely no work, and my assistant, lovely Anna, is nodding. But maybe I better not say never because people might say, I thought you said, I have approached someone and she knows who she is. She will have the big job and I'll just be behind the scenes, just turning the knobs. But no, again, it's just been a thrill.
Campaign slogan: air filters for all.
Air filters for all. A bit like clean air for all. Thank you, guys.
I think
Thank
you've
you.
got your campaign team here around. Right?